All right, afternoon, everybody. It is June the 3rd. It is THCB Gang, our 56th episode. I'm Matthew Holt, founder and publisher of the healthcare blog, at Baltimore on Twitter. A very distinguished guest lineup today. We're rescuing the lack of, the excess of Y chromosomes later on. Jessica DaMassa will come join us, but right now online on the line we have Kim Bellard, frequent contributor to THCB and writer, ex-plan exec, Jeff Goldsmith, healthcare futurist, and Mike Magee, medical historian. And we're going to plug all of them as we're going to go live now. We'll plug all of them in, and we have some fun stuff coming up. So let me say two little announcements. First one, as those of you who read the THCB newsletter will know, I'm doing another conference. Sorry. Jess and me were persuaded into it by Peter Grant, as some of you know, who's been running conferences for many years, to do a virtual online conference, which will be in September. So it's called Policies, Techies, and VCs. I should get the name of the conference right. And we'll see how that goes. So you've seen that announcement. The second one is that right now, while this is going out, there's another conference going on. There's a virtual mental behavioral health conference from my Celebrity Bibu, and actually I'm on that right now also at the same time as on here. So it's the appearing in many places, and there's a live chat function in that conference which Jess is manning. So when she's done running that, she'll come join us here. All right, okay. The admin trivia is over. It's been another week with some interesting stuff, some crazy stories, and some more things happening. So I would like to kick it off, and I'll ask Kim to tell me what he's been looking at.
I feel a little bit like Wile E. Coyote, how ended all of its mandates this week. And, even we've started going out to restaurants and stores, and cases are way down. So everything seems like it's almost back to normal, but I can't help but feeling that we're not out of this yet. And I'm just waiting for the big drop.
So Wile E. Coyote's you're off the cliff somewhere. Jeff, what have you been looking at this last week or two?
I just finished reading Michael Lewis's The Premonition, which was outstanding. I'm just an abject Michael Lewis fan.
Awesome. And did you hear the awful news about his daughter?
No.
Oh, tragic event. His daughter and her boyfriend, 19 years old, they were in a car crash right by my place in Squaw Valley, and they both died, unfortunately, across the Central Line. So terrible news. But yeah, I agree. He's just the greatest writer. And I haven't read the new one, but The Fifth Risk is like,
it was what it really was a coda to The Fifth Risk. It was, The Fifth Risk was all about what our government actually does. And, this was a case study in how hard it is to get our government to do anything. Even when we're sort of staring down the barrel of the shotgun. It was an absolutely fascinating. I think he's a really gifted storyteller, and this was a great story. I hope a lot of people read it.
Yes, that's Michael Lewis. Premonition is the name of the book, and this is the one about the sort of the rebels inside the government.
Right, the people who saw it coming and tried to wake up the apparatus to fight the pandemic.
All right, Mike, what have you been up to the last week or two?
Yeah, I would say sort of a combination of your guys. On the one hand, it does seem like we're getting back to normal, and that seems abnormal that we're getting back to normal.
The abnormality of normality, right?
Right. But at the same time, it reminds us that even if you get back to normal, where you're getting back to is an area where there are a lot of problems. And so one of the things that I have been exploring is off of the back end of a great investigative article by the former New York Times writer, Nicholas Wade. He was able to kind of unroof the fact that the NIH, and specifically Fauci's branch of the NIH, had in a large way supported Shi Zhang, who runs the Wuhan clinic, and that what he was supporting was very controversial mutant generational viral research, which they justified based on prevention. That being that if you experimented with these viruses and uncovered what they might, under the worst circumstances, be able to do through natural selection, you could then develop vaccines before they actually did what they're going to do. The problem is that increasingly, and we saw this kind of forecast by a kind of softening of the opinion of Fauci and of Francis Collins and of Biden himself, what they managed to do is to likely empower a giant scientific mishap with U.S. funding, and as a result, we've got 3.5 million people dead.
So Mike, I'd love to dive into this because it's something that I know there'll be an article from you coming out, which I've just seen, which is really exciting, really interesting about this. But stop. I'll give you one little historical anecdote, and then I want to know a bit more about this because I think we're all going to be fascinated. The historical anecdote is that, do you guys know the last case of smallpox death in the world where that happened?
Yeah, that was in the UK.
In the UK, Birmingham, England, there was a lab which was still working with smallpox, and somehow it got in the air filter or whatever, and a couple of people died, or a couple of people caught it and died. So the lab-borne virus thing is not complete fantasy.
No.
But there is a lot of politics and conspiracy theories about what the Chinese were doing and why they didn't want to happen. So can you back up and just explain, number one, what is the potential scientific benefit of creating the kind of extreme version of a virus like this to create vaccines or whatever is a benefit? And secondly, what's the mechanics of why the US or US organizations are supporting research like this in a Chinese lab? Can you just take us through that a bit?
Well, the beginnings of this in a serious way were the Batwoman integrating with a major virologist at the University of North Carolina. And what he taught her was new cleavage techniques that allowed them to create chimeras, combinations of two different virus genes, which allowed them with the coronavirus to basically cleave together the body of one virus with the spike of another virus. The spike is what allows you to make the connection to a human cell. And then on top of that, it enhances the strength of that connection. So as a result, it becomes more infective. So anyhow, he taught her how to do that. And he did that with NIH and with the National Allergy and Infectious Disease funding. And she then went back. They continued to publish together in 2018 and 2019. This did not become known when things fell apart last year, because the grant money had been shunted through a nonprofit that is New York based. And the nonprofit that is New York based basically is a medical industrial complex arm for virologists worldwide. And like all, high-level scientists, they're in this integrated career ladder. And so they support each other. They go along, they get their grant funded, they become famous, and they go to meetings with each other and continue to publish. Well, that's as chummy, if not more chummy, amongst the handful of the world's greatest virologists. So anyhow, when this disaster occurred, within 50 days, this nonprofit in New York and its executive director came together quietly and penned a Lancet editorial that basically said that this clearly was a natural passage of a virus from bats to humans, and that there was no possibility, absolutely none, that this could have been a laboratory spillover. The problem was that the guy who was the head of the New York nonprofit was the guy who had advanced the funding, the NIH funding for the whole operation to begin with. So as wild as it sounds, everybody in the know actually has known for over a year that it's much more likely that this was either an accidental spill out of that Wuhan lab, or that the investigators, 3 of them, contracted it in the autumn of 2019. Why did they contract it? Here's where it gets super crazy. You know, there are 4 different levels of safety and security in laboratories. A dentist office, for example, is at a level 2. And if you see those guys in spacesuits that are struggling to do basic functions in a laboratory, that's level 4. Well, obviously for these dangerous viral kind of research operations, it should be level 4. Well, as it turns out, the Wuhan lab up until this year has been functioning at level 2, at the dentist office level.
Wow.
So the whole thing is a huge mess. And what really got me going was this morning I was watching Morning Joe on MSNBC, and Tony Fauci, who's everywhere, was there. And Tony Fauci says, you know, we just got to keep an open mind. Like anything could have happened, we need to just keep an open mind as we explore to it. Well, Fauci and Francis Collins had to give the approval for this research to go forward and to provide the grant funding. So, you know, he better keep an open mind, because those guys have been involved with it for a while.
So the theory is we find these viruses that are more we mutate the worst of all viruses. We can start figuring out vaccines and prevention and what have you if we do this in a controlled way.
Stay one step ahead of natural selection.
I mean, I'm still a bit. I mean, why is a US NIH front essentially funding it in China rather than funding the US? Or are we funding the US and we're funding around the world and it just wasn't we didn't know? Or is that unknown? Well,
2/3 of the US government funding for Wuhan is from the Department of Defense and the Pentagon.
Well,
so
but that makes Matthew's question even more. Why
would they do that? Because the people who are most aggressive about this kind of research view it as a defensive move. So basically, either you stay one step ahead of natural selection, or you stay one step ahead of an enemy who might fashion this as a bioweapon.
Right, but wouldn't the most natural enemy be China?
Well, there is some confusion about whether we might have been working lock-armed on this, and that part of the reason why the public doesn't have the full story on this is because the full story involves several nations' national defense.
Yeah, but whoever in the U.S. would decide to fund this has to recognize that it's unlikely that China would share everything with us. I mean, they don't view us as a, compatriot. They view us as someone that they want to do better than.
Right.
Well, I don't know
whether. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how many people remember how close we came with SARS,
right,
to what happened in the last 18 months. SARS scared the crap out of the Bush administration, not only Dick Cheney, but also President Bush himself. That story is actually told in the premonition. SARS was a coronavirus. It killed only 800 people, but 15% of the people that were infected. No one really knows why SARS didn't blow up, given what we know now about how porous our borders are and how tough it is to implement controls on travel and isolate people that are infected. SARS was a huge, it was a bullet dodged. And I think ever since SARS, both the scientific community and the defense community have been concerned about coronaviruses, and for very good reason. So the idea that this is, some type of nefarious plot, honestly, guys, we should have been doing the type of research that is being discussed here at scale 15 years ago.
Absolutely. So
develop solutions based on that research.
So let me ask us two questions about it. Number one, I remember I was actually going through Hong Kong during SARS, and I remember wearing the masks and what have you. And I also remember at that time, Cathay Pacific, which is the Hong Kong airline, I think revenue went down 90%. So it did have a regional, even though it was small and regional, had a regional effect. And I think because we dodged a bullet, it allowed us 15 years. 19 years later, it allowed us to start thinking, well, it's going to stay in Wuhan, it's going to stay in Milan, it's not coming here, it's not going worldwide. And obviously, this virus is cleverer because this virus doesn't kill as many people, but it spreads more easily. This is a better virus, as my virologist friend in London told me. It's a very sensible one. But here's the question. Number one, okay, if we're doing this stuff and it's going to come, and it was true, is there a possibility to actually get, I don't know why it's bubbled up just in the last few days. Is there a possibility of figuring out whether it came from a wet market in Wuhan or whether it came from the lab? We're going to find out. And number two, what's this going to do to the conspiracy theorists in the US who are here, in number already?
Mike might have a better answer to this than I, but if there was a chimera created, it had a genetic signature.
Right.
And that genetic signature is a fairly definitive picture of what the critter is. Comparing that genetic signature to the genetic signature of the people in the chain of transmission that was created by this phenomenon or that emerged from Wuhan in December and January of 2020 is not rocket science, folks.
So if we find out, so if that's true, and that sounds logical, and if we find out that it did have that, is there a chance we would find out? Because obviously the Chinese government controls that lab, and there's a lot of interest in not making it look like that. But will we find out? And if we do find out, what's that impact going to be?
I'm curious. Biden gave his people.
Jeff, thank him. Then Mike. Sorry.
Yeah, the Chinese lab did the initial sequencing. They produced the first genetic sequence of this virus, on which basis American laboratories were actually able to create the virus, which launched a lot of the vaccine development activity. So, the very first gene sequence emerged from this lab. So, the question of what they created, I don't know if they're going to, what degree of cooperation we're going to get out of all of this, but these are knowable facts.
Well, as I understand it, Biden has given his people 90 days to examine this, but they're not going to examine it by going to China. They apparently have troves of quote unexamined documents, in quote, that they're going to examine and ask. So I'm wondering, what is all this documentation and why wasn't it examined before? Especially if the Trump administration was trying to pin it on China and there's all these documents that might pin it on China, why wouldn't they have been all over that?
Well, I think the confusing thing about all of this is that number one, Trump went after China. So the natural thing was to recoil from that and say, Trump's out of his mind, which he is. But putting that aside, the reality is when Biden calls for this investigation is that they already know the answer. Otherwise, they wouldn't call for the investigation. And what they're doing is slow walking us away from this notion that a live animal market was responsible for this. And what we're going to get at the end of 3 months is that this was a laboratory error. Now, what makes it, I think, kind of more confusing and probably where we ought to be focusing is where Nick Wade has focused. And his article is just unbelievable. It's in Science The Wire, and it's heavily documented. And although he admits that he cannot absolutely prove what exactly happened. He lays out in numbers all of the evidence that leads him to believe that this was a lab error and a spillover. And what he really focuses on is the fact that our medical industrial complex supported what are called gain of function experiments with viruses. That is to say, we took over the role of God, and instead of saying it's going to take you 1,000 years, virus, to figure out how to become your most infective self, we're going to help you along with our gain of function. And we're going to do that by creating a genetic mouse model that is what they call humanized. That is to say, when you experiment with this kind of mice, it behaves like a human lung cell. And so what they did was began in 2018 to do these gain of function studies on these mice. And what they were able to do in a very much shorter period of time is help the virus figure out how to knock the hell out of us. And then the damn thing has escaped. And what makes it, I think, very difficult to unravel is the fact that the guy who is in the lead of all of this is originally a British scientist that became an American citizen in around 1990. His name is Peter Daszak, D-A-S-Z-A.
You can't trust those damn English immigrants to the US becoming citizens, I tell you.
He's the head of a New York-based nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance. And the major Pentagon and NIH funding travels through EcoHealth Alliance. Some $100 million worth of it traveled through to him between 2013 and 2020, and he then redistributed the funds. And one of the groups that he funded heavily and continues to is the Wuhan group.
Mike,
So,
I'm puzzled that
the point being that once this mishap happened, he knew immediately what had happened, and they moved to cover it up. And the major virologists around the globe assisted in covering this thing up. But like all truths that comes out, and this is coming out pretty quickly now, but within 3 months, this will become more common knowledge, I think.
what I'm struggling with is that, Fauci testified under pressure by Rand Paul that we did not fund any gain of function. And now that this has come out, Rand Paul is saying that Fauci committed perjury. So if what you're saying is true, then Fauci did lie under oath. So I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that.
Remember that technically he was right, because there was no direct funding of this research to Wuhan. That's why you have the Peter Daszak EcoHealth Alliance. That's why it was established. They washed the money through the EcoHealth Alliance and then distributed it to all the people who were doing this kind of research.
But there is a fascinating thing here, which is why did the previous administration not who was so anti-China not find this out and push it, right?
That's the part I don't get.
Yeah,
I mean, this is red meat for Trump's lying about how this was weaponized by the Chinese.
I don't think they were far enough along to know for sure that that's what had happened. See, I mean, if you have...
I'm amazed because Trump said all kinds of things that we know weren't true.
Matter in this?
Right?
There's a sort of 3 levels of this. I mean, on the one level, it's pretty innocent, right? You've got this magnificent Batwoman scientist who goes to caves. She gets all of the specimens, and these very animals suddenly end up 100 kilometers over to Wuhan in these animal markets, and it passes that way. So that's one way, seems pretty innocent. Second way is that, a couple of the lab people unfortunately caught it and spread it. That's not, that's an unhappy event, but, these things happen. We're all human. The third way it happens is, you've got negligence in these laboratories. They're not being careful with these experiments. And of course, there's going to be spillover. And the fourth thing would be, no, they were developing it as a weapon and they were going to release it anyhow. And they released it and then look, it worked, worked better than they ever would have imagined. So, I don't think it's the innocent market. I don't think it's a weapon of war. I think this is just a group of profit and career seeking scientists. They learned how to do these things. They convinced funders that it was okay and safe because they wanted to achieve great scientific breakthroughs. And at the end of the day, the risk was greater than any possible gain. I think it's as simple as that.
Another thing that doesn't make sense to me is why these funders who assume knowledgeable people, why they would have funded a laboratory that's only operating at the level of a dentist office. I mean, they know what protocols should be in place. Why would they not require those protocols? Well,
remember, she came heavily vouched for by one of the top U.S. virologists in the world, the guy that was at UNC. She had been working with him, by Barrick, and she had been working with him, since 2015 on these approaches. So, it wasn't like she came out of nowhere. Now, did they know exactly what kind of lab was going on there? I mean, this is kind of a second level, third level city in China. Probably not. Had they visited it, I don't know. It's a pretty insular country, obviously. Is it open to our kind of regulatory thing? I mean, even in the US, remember, steroid injections caused fungal infections that killed people just 10 years ago in a laboratory that had been approved by the US government in Boston, Massachusetts. So, these kind of rogue labs happen.
Hey, Mike, can I ask you to kick this discussion up 2 levels and ask you, so what?
Right.
We could all say so what.
Let us assume that what you have told, what Nick discovered and what you've told us is in fact correct. What does it mean?
Well, Jeff, I think it's very, everybody is going to have to answer, everybody who is in any way tied to medical science is going to have to answer that for himself. For me personally, it makes me more cautious about scientific progress. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, just because we can do it, do we really want to put ourselves in that position? And I would feel that way if I was talking about infertility research as much as I was talking about antiviral research. The question is, in a system that is primarily profit and career driven and has legitimized intermingling of academia, of industry, and of government, do we have sufficient safeguards to make wise decisions that may require limiting profit and scientific success, but perhaps improving the lot of mankind? It's about, to me, do we have sufficient wisdom to manage a system that is this, that is so intensely geared on success and on innovation? That's my question.
Can I pose a hypothetical to you and ask you to react to it? Say you're the president of the United States or the head of the NIH, and you knew that having obtained the genetic sequence for this virus, which has killed several million people in the world, and that it only took a couple of weeks from publishing the genetic sequence for the virus to someone being able to produce the virus itself. Why can't a terrorist with a PhD in microbiology do the very same thing and unleash something that killed 3% of the people that it infected instead of 1%? What is your sense of the appropriate social response to that threat?
Well, my reaction would be, without being this kind of a high-level scientist, that, yeah, it probably is possible. But again, that is the very argument that Barrick and others used to allow for funding of this, that if we don't do it ourselves and prepare for it either as a natural or unnatural occurrence, we're going to be sorry someday. Now, on the other side of the coin, where people are saying, look, I'm telling you, we're not going to be able to avoid a mishap with this thing. And if we screw up after we've developed a hyper-weaponized virus, there's going to be hell to pay. So, I don't know what the right answer is, but what I am saying is that, and what I think is totally clear in this story, is that the scientific luminaries in this kind of virus research, when they saw what had happened, did not expose the spillover. They did just the opposite. They coalesced and in Lancet put together an editorial within 50 days covering their asses. That's, I think, what worries me the most, that nobody, that they didn't react appropriately from the standpoint of scientific.
And I'm not that surprised, because cover-ups are pretty legion in basically everything. And if you're saying that what Biden's now doing is slow walking out the truth, I think, but there's two areas here. One is, Jeff's probably right, and there's a fascinating book called Neolife that came out of the Neolife group run by I'm blanking on her name, Jane. I will get it to you. Lovely. Which talks about what's it going to be like when when teenagers are going to have the tools to do gene manipulation and do the stuff with biology that they can now do with videos and what have you, because that's coming, right? And so terrorists are going to be in there, and it's going to be a world we have to live with that. But the other thing is just more currently. I'd love, Kim and Jeff, your reaction to this. I mean, as you know, we have 30% of the country that said, well, not 30%, a big chunk of, 30% of the Republican Party, 40% of the Republican Party, and the evangelicals and others said they will not get this virus, will not get the vaccine. God will take care of them. We're going to get to herd immunity. But that's because most of us still have some faith in science. If we're now saying that the scientists, including the people who are like the people who created the vaccine that's going to save us, in fact, we're getting up to this crazy stuff and not paying attention to what they were doing, and there wasn't good regulation and the rest of it. I mean, if it's no longer a conspiracy theory, if we're heading that way, yes, we need more regulation, we need better oversight, we need all this good stuff. But I mean, isn't that going to really hurt the ability of science to actually help us in the future?
Well, two things. First, Jeff, to your question, there's an article in The Atlantic by David Frum. Trump supporters are getting the lab leak story backwards. It's a what if. He says that if it was an accidental lab leak, as is probably true, the answer is not more polarization and more trying to wall things off. The answer is you need more transparency and more openness. So it's the opposite of what the Trump people are calling for. So that's a good thing. The other thing is that, so right now we're having this whole UFO thing, where for 40 years, the scientists have been telling us there aren't UFOs. And now the Navy's saying, well, maybe there are, and we're going to get this report. So yeah, I think science is under attack in every aspect of American culture.
Yeah, but you're right. It's the lack of openness and lack of transparency, lack of allowing doubt in science. But we know where that goes, and go back to vaccines, not this current vaccine, but go back to the vaccines around measles and autism and all that whole story, which we know there was some bad science. Yeah, it's had real consequences for health and society and everything else. I don't know.
Why, guys? Ask the question, why would you do gain of function research in the first place? Unless you were trying to run out ahead of the virus and develop remedies for it at a much more powerful remedies than the ones that were put together here on the fly to deal with COVID-19. Why bother doing the research at all?
You become famous.
Oh, come on.
No, seriously.
Oh, well, come on, Mike.
No,
that's
tens of millions
of people. This wasn't about money. That's
No, no,
utter
no.
bullshit.
I'm saying it within the construct of academic advancement, this is a huge motivator.
I agree, but I agree with Jeff.
You're talking about someone who worked in a medical school dean's office. We had a P4 containment facility at our place. We were doing viral oncology research because we weren't sure that viruses weren't causing cancer.
Yeah.
Was that all about being famous?
No,
Come
it
on.
only, Jeff, it only takes what, maybe 1% of these guys. We had a guy at Jefferson who was a cancer researcher, and he was one of the earliest ones who fabricated his data. And, he was an outlier, it's true, but he had a lot of influential papers that got published, and they carried the day, and they were fabricated. So no, I don't think it's beyond the realm of imagination that someone who has worked all his life dreaming of being the very best at what he does discovers a technology and tips the risk benefit toward benefit in order to get funded, because getting funded obviously has a lot of benefits. But in addition to that, everybody is asking your opinion. I mean, I think that's a strong motivation.
But to break up the fist fight between you two, because I can see both sides, but I don't think it actually matters, right? The impact is whether it was done for the purest of reasons, which for research, whether it was done big, and pushed along further than it should have been by self-interest of the scientist or whoever. It doesn't matter if we're going to end up with the fact where this story is really going to come out. People are going to start betting. I think people are going to get polarized about the nation. I'm going to get anti-science. I think this is terrible.
Well, yeah, let's have another witch hunt.
Well, I think we're going to have solution.
That's the solution to our incredible vulnerability to these biological threats. Let's have another witch hunt. That makes a lot of sense.
The thing that I've not heard is
Kim, and then I need to change the topic. But Kim, because
the thing that I've not heard is,
I mean, it's a huge topic, so I don't mind it. But
if this gain of function research is going on, which I assume that it is, where are the examples of where it has actually led to a vaccine or an antidote or something useful? Otherwise, why do it? Absolutely. If it doesn't actually produce beneficial things, the only reason to do it is, a weapon.
Be famous. Well, the answer is simple, is that we really don't understand these critters well enough to be able to go one level up and not be on the defense. In other words, to be able to create a vaccine that can manage an entire class of coronaviruses, all of them, instead of just one after it's, infected, 10 million people. That's the reason to do it.
Well, I mean, I agree. It seems to me that Jeff's dead right. It makes sense to do the science, but I'm much more worried about the fact we're going to have this piece that most people would have no idea the U.S. government was funding scientific research in China, even though we didn't know about the CIA doing black sites across the world in the 2000s. There's a bunch of stuff you don't know about. It comes out, it has an impact, and we know the issue with where a significant minority of this country and the world is regarding the role of the scientific method. And I think Kim's right. If there are good outcomes from similar types of research that's already been done, those need to be surfaced very quickly by the scientific community, or else, as you said, we're going to be on the defense against China, we're on the defense against science, and it's going to be extremely tricky. And I assumed, because I'm a dumb person who's maybe too trusting, I assumed that when that article came out that it was the wet market and it was from the bat or whatever. And I saw Contagion again over the weekend, which was remarkably really prescient and really good movie, and it came from a bat there, which was dropped a banana on top of the pig, who then made Gwyneth Paltrow.
Well, two quick points.
2 quick points, then we're going to change topic.
Yes, Kim is right. Wade finishes his article by basically saying that at least thus far, it's been all risk and no gain yet from these types of experiments. So there isn't anything you can point to that says that these experiments have delivered human good yet. Maybe they will in the future. The second thing is, let's remember that in the last 40 years, we basically have dismantled most of the checks and balances on academic, governmental, industrial cooperation in science. We basically have enabled the academic institutions and their physicians to own their own patents, to interface with industry, to use nonprofits like this one, to move money around, and to do basically what they saw best. Now, maybe they are doing what is best, but from my point of view, I like checks and balances to slow things down. Furthermore, I prefer to have academic scientists not define themselves as either physicians or educators, but to just say, we're researchers. I would like them to register as lobbyists, and because they're getting a couple $100,000 from industry or from wherever, and just do the science. I don't see why they have to have a triple purpose anymore. I'd prefer to just have them function as successful scientists.
All right.
So I'm waiting for the Michael Lewis book.
It's a bit like the joke when they say that Mitch McConnell should be a NASCAR driver, and have all the different logos, all the companies to pay for him on it. Right, here fresh from her triumphant run over going behavioral digital health is Jess DaMassa.
Perfect timing.
Jess, you joined us just at the moment where I'm finally shutting these guys up. We've been talking about the Wuhan lab spillover thing. It's been really quite a fiery conversation for a while.
Sorry, I missed that conversation.
You'll have to catch up and see it. But
Can you
now
make
I'm
your
going
window
to
between Jeff and Mike just to break them up?
I'm going to be change the topic deliberately, and I want to talk about something that's completely different, which is that yesterday Babylon Health, which is one of the most controversial of the digital health companies, announced it was going to SPAC out. And I want to get all of your reaction to this. So Babylon, for those who don't know it, is a British company run by a guy who used to run private hospitals and didn't run them very well, to be honest. Not like the private hospitals that Jeff mentioned in the PBS special that Jeff was part of a couple of weeks back, which I highly recommend you watching. That's a sidebar. Good session on what happened during COVID to public hospitals. Anyway. So Babylon is primarily, it's a chatbot that helps people, sort of identify symptoms and come up with a solution. And the company has raised a huge amount of money, including more than 550 million round a couple of years back, most of which came from the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. And the other thing they've been doing is in the UK, they've bought GP practices, primary care practices, and they've acquired them, and they're basically integrating, and it's an interesting idea, integrating a chatbot symptom checker digital front door function with the actual primary care practice. They came to the US relatively recently. Centene, the big Medicaid plan, has made an investment. And in the last just 3 months, they've acquired two relatively, not big, but sizable enough regional IPA medical practices in California, one right where I live in Marin County just a couple of weeks back, and one in Fresno, Central Valley, California, which I think had 60, 80,000 covered lives in an IPA doing Medicare Advantage.
Not the good IPA, not the beer IPA.
No, not the IPA we want to drink, the other kind of IPA. Yeah. That's just to
be clear.
All right. So with that little bit of background, here I've got to present this chart, which is from the Babylon, not S1, but whatever, the SPAC document. Just I want to get your commentary, all of your commentary.
Look on your face right now. I shudder to think what this chart is.
I think right. So what they're saying here is that how they're going to make money is by creating cost savings through their proactive primary care. Follow along with me. So the partner, I assume the partner is a health plan, gives them 80% of the premium. They give some fixed savings back. And then they do these three things. They enable users to better manage their health using cost-effective primary care. They lower the need for expensive reactive secondary care, which is what Kaiser's been doing all these years. And then here's the bit which I really think you're all going to enjoy. Over time, Babylon's margin is going to expand because essentially they replace secondary care with efficient primary care. So I thought I would just love to get your reaction to this, Jeff, because
Well, do you remember, I mean, we were talking about Michael Lewis earlier about, his book, The New Thing.
the healthy
And they had the triangle or whatever it was, or the quadrilateral. I mean, this is a PowerPoint world. It's like a separate reality from the reality of day-to-day medical practice. I mean, God love him, Matthew. That's all I got to say. God love him. PowerPoint is God's gift.
I have two thoughts, right? One is, I actually believe that we can do primary and secondary care better. And I think there are plenty of organizations that have shown us that. So number one, so fair enough. My biggest problem with this is speaking as either a premium to partner. I think premium to partner means government gives money to Medicare Advantage plan, I assume, but it might be, employer gives money to TPA or whatever, right? There's money coming in this. If I have a vendor, if I am a acquirer of healthcare services for my population, whatever population may be, and I have a vendor that can tell me that I can name that tune in 10% less, 15% less. Jonathan Bush at Firefly says I can do it 50% less. I'm not going to just let them keep the margin I'm not going to say, great, give me with 10% off and you keep that little margin. I want to encourage other people to compete about that and force that margin down and pay them less. That's how it works in the real world.
Matthew,
now, it doesn't work in healthcare, but that's what I want to do.
There's been a persistent myth, and that's what it is, that 30% of healthcare is unnecessary. And it came from Jack Wenberg's famous New England Journal of Medicine article in 1984 that compared healthcare utilization in New Haven with healthcare utilization in Boston.
Right.
And his thesis was doctors in Boston, specialists, found stuff to do to people that presumably wasn't necessary and ran up the tab. And that's the reason, we had more hospital beds and more specialists in Boston. Well, a book by Dr. Cooper, who died a few years ago, Buzz Cooper, called, essentially about the myths of health reform, went back and looked at Wenberg's piece. And you know where the 30% difference was? The hospital service areas that Jack Wenberg was using compared inner city Boston to metropolitan New Haven, including the suburbs, including all those Yale students. It was just absolutely atrocious social science. The two service areas were not remotely comparable. And a lot of that 30% difference was a function of the people inside the Boston service area of those hospitals were a lot sicker than the people in New Haven, including all of those folks that were, poor little sheep, that didn't have any income and were counted as poor. So, we've founded an entire generation of healthcare investment around this idea that 30% of healthcare is unnecessary. And this is the latest installment of that myth.
There have been other studies that have come up with similar numbers in that. It wasn't just his study.
It's rubbish. So much of it is driven by poverty and by social determinants. And, you can change some of those things with effective primary care. We've got very effective, community health centers that work with the poor that use a lot of preventive measures and all the rest of it. But I think this idea that there's just this vast amount of unnecessary care, I just think it's rubbish.
I don't know. I'm not a heavy healthcare user, but from what I've seen of the people in my life that are, I think there's a lot of waste.
So
I also say one thing we're talking about here.
If you look at what
read Cooper's book.
Yeah, but if you look at the study that Anderson and Reinhardt did, which ended up in the "If the Price is Stupid" piece in Health Thurs back in 03, 02, something like that, they actually looked and said the number of services, and I think this is true, the number of services across international comparison-wise, the number of services there weren't that different. Now, I happen to believe that we do a lot. We do far too many services in a lot of areas, and there is probably waste or whatever. But I think it's very, as Jeff said, it's very hard to identify. And don't forget, it's very
Uwe's paper and what a lot of the research that we've seen suggest is that per capita utilization of services is actually lower in the United States than it is in most of Europe, but the prices are higher.
Right.
That was
It's the prices, right?
The exception was imaging. We are higher on imaging than everybody else.
Yes, but just about everything else, surgical intervention, we are lower. Imaging is higher, Ken, absolutely.
Now
Most of the rest of medical care utilization, hospital days per thousand, physician visits per thousand are lower than they are in those countries that have allegedly solved this problem.
And if you look at Niall Ferguson's work at not Niall Ferguson, Niall Brennan's work, Niall Ferguson's the historian, Niall Brennan at the Healthcare Cost Institute, recent data, they show that essentially something is that hospital volumes prior pandemic went down, hospital pricing increased more than enough to make up for the decrease in volume. So there's a lot going on.
Looking at those numbers, and a lot of that is the pandemic relief that hospitals got.
Well,
I'm talking about its data revenue.
I'm talking about its data pre-pandemic.
Going back to Babylon Health, there's a guy on Twitter that I came across. His handle is Dr. Murphy 11.
Yes,
his real name is apparently David Watkins. He is the fiercest Babylon Health critic you are ever going to find. He's very worth listening to. He's been challenging them in England for 10 years.
He's a consultant.
Can you say something though about how often? Like, let's just for a minute acknowledge the fact that this is not going to be the first time or the last time that we're going to see this slide. Because Matthew, I mean, like truly, like I'm thinking in my head, like just wait till the guys at Transcarent, the people at Bowie Health, the folks over at Firefly, the guys at Crossover, the guys at Oak Street, wait till they get a hold of this slide, because this is going to be as ubiquitous to our little corner of the health tech industry as the Whiting scale picture in the remote monitoring slide that everybody had 3 years ago.
So Jess, let me ask you, ask always a question, but here's the question, right? So healthcare buyers, and if Ian was on here, he could run on his line about employers being cranky, confused, aimless, and spineless. If I discovered the secret method to extract the 30%, either by lowering the price or by doing fewer services or whatever I did, would the end purchaser, the buyer, whoever it is, the government, would they figure it out and come back to me and say, okay, I want my pricing to them 30%? Or would they let me keep it as a creative margin, which is what this slide says?
That's what lobbyists
That's what I love about this slide. And that's why we're going to see it in all of those other virtual primary care navigation with the side of mental health companies that are coming down the pike. You're going to see this in every deck from here on out. Guys,
that's what lobbyists are for, is to keep your money. Okay. I mean, it's like, it's almost like a natural law. I mean, look at the PBMs. What's becoming obvious is that our drug delivery system is as responsible for the high cost of medicine as the pharmaceutical companies are. And what was their mission in life? Their mission in life was to assist in the transition from branded drugs to generics and to use their purchasing power to lower the price. What they did is they used their purchasing power to put more money in their own pockets. And now they're fighting this big battle over drug pricing to try and keep the money.
Good to see that health tech is keeping the American tradition of inserting a third-party player to take out a chunk of a margin, keeping that tradition going strong. So proud of my generation of innovators.
That's exactly what's happening. It's
I'm reminded of the scene in Animal House where the guy says, "Oh, I'm sorry if we took a few liberties with our female party guest, or rest of it. But if you're going to indict us, you indict the whole fraternity system, not the fraternity system, you indict the whole of the college system. And in that case, only a bad mouthing America. I'm not going to stand here and let you bad mouth the America." Oh my word! All right. Well, we're at.
I love the slide. Oh, it's a great slide.
It's great, and I think the great news is that the British have adopted, American capitalism in its finest. The one thing I would say in that, you're probably right there. It probably works, right? As a slide, as a business model. The one thing I would say is that I do believe that if you got it right, if you get a high touch, driven by technology system out for primary care, you probably improve and build up the patient experience. That does roll into a lot of the monitoring we're going to see happening and the stuff on that watch. I mean, there should be you should be able to make the patient care experience better. But I'm with you, Jeff. I mean, in the end, if we're going to make it cheaper, somebody's ox has got to get gored, and there are too many lobbyists around for that to happen. So.
Well, you know, and there is a moment where you can reduce people's incomes, and it's between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning when you're pushing out a budget reconciliation bill. You can gore all sorts of oxes before the lobbyists catch up to it. It happened to the cardiologist in 2005. I mean, you know, you can watch the process. There actually is a list. Somebody has a list of, you know, the weakest claims on the dollars. And a lot of that stuff gets shoved into the reconciliation bill at the last minute. And then when it gets published, people go, uh-oh, we're going to get it.
And they spend 4 or 5 years fighting. I remember the physical therapist fighting this in 1998 and getting it all back in 2001.
Well, and cutting the rake off that oncologists get on the chemotherapy. I mean, there's a long list. Our political system really does belong in the Smithsonian Museum.
All right. Well,
it's a good thing that AHIP has rebranded, people, and that they're not just focused on health plans anymore. Did you see that news today?
No, what do they hit now?
They're not focused on just health plans because of the growing, like the blend and the convergence between health plans and health systems. So now they're taking a more broad approach to lobbying that includes both. Oh, they're keeping it the same. It's just called AHIP. But now it doesn't stand for
it. Doesn't stand for
it's like AARP. It's no longer for applied purposes.
Yeah, they took a meaningless healthcare acronym and actually just stripped away the meaning intentionally.
Well, and you know, the term that's being used to describe those entities is payviders, which I absolutely love. As a Medicare Advantage patient, I can tell you, I don't want to go in a room that has a payvider in it. You know, I want to call the exterminator.
Payvider, I imagine like sharks just.
There's a payvider in my basement called the exterminator.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll end this part by just saying that when AARP changed its name, no longer about retired persons, they started sending out, you know, the option to join up, and then Health 2.0, they've been big sponsor of Health 2.0, so they ran a whole bunch of innovation programs for new health tech companies, Health 2.0, and they sent all of the staff the ability to sign up. And all the sort of 23-year-olds in my office were like, what the hell am I signing up for AARP? All right. We're running out of time. This has been, we had an amazing 2-half conversation here. So really enjoyed the THCB Gang for today. Before we go, let's quickly go around. What are we looking forward to for the next week or two? I'll start with you, Kim.
Well, I'm waiting to see what the Supreme Court does with ACA. I saw a poll that had 2 shocking things on it for me. One is that a majority of people think that the mandate is in fact unconstitutional. And secondly, only about half the people think that if it is ruled unconstitutional, the entire law should be struck down. So 11 years after the fact, only half the people in America think that the law should not be struck down. It just blew my mind.
Wow, I didn't think that, but yes, we managed to get through the whole thing without mentioning that. Jeff, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in whether Biden is going to throw the home care initiative that he put in his infrastructure bill out to make a deal with the Republicans. I thought that was a very powerful idea. Our social safety net absolutely needs to be renovated and strengthened. And if he's willing to trade that out in exchange for bipartisan collaboration, maybe my expectations will be lowered back down to where they were at the beginning of his administration.
I see no case for bipartisan cooperation given what just happened over the January 6th thing, but we'll go from there. Mike.
I continue to believe that the current healthcare status quo is too inefficient to survive, and that there will be workarounds, and that a Biden who, as with the 3-month investigation ahead of us with Wuhan, demonstrates once again, is a remarkably skillful politician. And so I believe that he is slowly but surely backing his opponents into various different corners, and that at the end of the day, we're going to see substantive change within the next 12 months.
Optimism there from Mike, as in. Jess, what are you getting next couple of weeks?
Well, now I've got to start tracking how many times I see that Babylon 30% margin slide in new pitch decks that are out there for luring investors into whatever's going to SPAC next. So yeah, I've got my eye on whatever is going to SPAC next, because we know we're not done. I can't wait to see what happens here. And I'm keeping my eye out. Next couple weeks, we're going to start seeing earnings from some of our publicly traded friends, including those big telehealth companies. I'm very curious to see those numbers, because those will be the Q1 2021 and this part of the year, the beginning part of Q2 in terms of utilization. I want to see if there's that downtick in virtual care that we've been kind of waiting and holding our breath to see if that's starting to materialize and what happens then. And then I'm also going to keep my eye on the brand new Policies, Techies, and VC conference to see who else we're going to attract to speak at that.
And I got that little conference time I got a plug at the start of this. I don't know how it happened. What kind of naked self-interest was going on here, but we're looking forward to be a lot of fun. All right, and with that, we are done for THCB Gang today. I want to thank my guests. Come on up. As ever, here we go. I want to thank my guests, Kim Bellard, all the way from holding up somewhere in the Midwest from Cincinnati, Jeff Goldsmith from the ranch in deepest Virginia, Mike Magee from Connecticut, and Jessica DaMassa phoning in from the as yet not quite underwater city of Jacksonville, Florida. Although if you've been following on else, you would know she's been all over the place: Chicago, Asheville, North Carolina, God knows where else this week. That's the end of THCB Gang. We're looking forward to. I'll be back here same time, same place next week. That's June the 10th. It'll be at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. If you're listening on the podcast, thanks for tuning in. You can listen anytime there. And I want to thank all of you for listening. And as Jess said, yes, check out these Policies, Techies, VCs conference. That's you'll see all over the internet, and we'll put an announcement about that on the blog as well. And with that, thank you all.